All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Bell Curve. Before we jump in, quick disclaimer. The views expressed by my co-host today are their personal views, and they do not represent the views of any organization with which the co-hosts are associated with. Nothing in the episode is construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or other advice. You know the deal. Now, let's jump into the episode.
Hey everyone, before we get into it today, just want to give a quick shout out to this season's sponsor, Rook. Close to $1 billion worth of MEV has been taken out of users' pockets, and that's just on Ethereum, and that number is only getting larger, unfortunately. Rook thinks that it's time for a change, and they've built a solution which is going to automatically redirect that MEV back to where it belongs, into the user's pocket. So you're going to be hearing all about them later in the show. I'm a huge fan of this team and what they're building, so stay tuned to find out more. Welcome to the intro episode, the kickoff episode to season 4. I'm very excited to be joined by Hasu. We're going to be taking a journey into the dark forest and exploring MEV. Hasu, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, woohoo! It's good to be back. Speaking about MEV and doing some podcasting. I'm very excited to do this with you.
Yeah, me as well. So let's just get into it. And folks who have listened to previous seasons of Bell Curve will know that the point of this episode is basically to lay out some of the ideas that we're going to be exploring in depth later in the season. And I think it would be a very cool outcome if both of us, we're going to lay some of these things out and we're going to kind of, speak through and understand what our opinions are going into the season. And I would love it if we change our mind about a couple of things, after we've discussed these topics with our guests. I think that'd be a great outcome.
Oh yeah. I when we designed the guest list, there's a bunch of people on there who I have not talked to so far. So there will be a lot of new for me in these conversations, and frankly, that's a big reason also why I enjoy podcasting and why I enjoy doing this season on MEV, because it allows me to meet new people and get new perspectives on MEV, which is just a field that is constantly evolving.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to start, maybe to introduce the first big topic that we're going to talk about, which is, what does equitable distribution of MEV look like across the MEV value chain? There's a lot to unpack there. So maybe, Hasu, could I tee it up to you, and could you kind of break down this concept, right, that many people will be familiar with, but what the MEV value chain is, who are the actors, and then what do we mean when we talk about what does equitable distribution of value look like across that chain?
Most people know MEV as the money that miners or validators can extract from reordering, inserting, censoring, etc., the list of transactions that they put into a block, right? So I would actually go and generalize that to say it is any money that, or any value that a privileged actor can extract in any system as a result of their privileged position. And so if you use that definition, then all of a sudden you start to see MEV everywhere. For example, central banks, going out of control, printing money that leads to hyperinflation, CC Balaji. That's MEV, right? Google cheating in their ad auction, that's MEV. There's just so many forms of MEV everywhere. And my bull thesis for crypto is actually that people want crypto in order to escape MEV in the real world. Right? They want systems that are more fair, that are more decentralized, where there are fewer privileged actors in them that can extract less MEV. And so, I think I like this arc that there's MEV in crypto and MEV outside of crypto. And so I think we need to make sure that the systems that we build in crypto are as resilient to MEV as possible, because otherwise the whole thesis doesn't work out.
And I think there's, to borrow a phrase that Stefan, right, has used, is there's kind of this idea of MEV dystopia. And let's go into this season assuming that MEV is an inevitable outcome when you have different systems like this. And to your point, that could be a crypto economic network, that could be a central bank, that could be Google's ad network. Let's say there will always be privileged people in these sorts of systems, and there's always going to be a way to extract value. But there's probably systems that have structures that enable better, more fair outcomes. And then there are probably more black box, opaque systems where maybe the outcomes are good, maybe they're not so good. So maybe let's even back up for a second there. And when you're designing these systems, right? Because Flashbots in many ways is involved in designing these economic systems. What are some of the principles that you sort of used or think about?
Oh, that's such a great question. What are the principles? I would say one of the main principles in reducing MEV is the idea of competition. Because when you have competition, for example, in the MEV supply chain, we try to have competition at as many layers of the stack as possible. When you have competition between different block builders in order to buy a block from the next validator, then the result is that they start to compete on price and they start to bid up what they are willing to pay, and the validator makes more money. If you go down one layer, then if you have more competition between searchers for the same MEV opportunity, they start to bid up the value of that opportunity and give more money to the builder. One layer before that, let's say if you have more competition between wallets or applications to minimize the amount of MEV that the user exposes, then there will be less money lost. And so I think competition to do better, to be more innovative, and to find better solutions, that's one of the main principles. Another one would be privacy. That's very big for us at Flashbots, because if a transaction is private, then it's much harder to extract MEV from it, because you don't know what the transaction is doing. You can't simulate it. You can't say, let me front run this transaction, for example, because while the transaction is private, it could do like a million different things. And so whatever you do is purely speculative, right? So what else? I think giving control over their transactions to users, I think that's a big one. So a big reason why we are talking about MEV as such a big topic is that users and wallets and applications for a very long period of time did not take control over their transactions. They have the power to do it, right? They could, for example, use a DEX aggregator instead of using Uniswap, or they could use a wallet that protects them from MEV that routes their transactions through a private channel to miners, or they could change their RPC endpoint in MetaMask to do the same thing, right? It's not like options are not available, but this is a complicated topic, and yeah, it's just very hard for people, I think, to see the differences and see to really compare different options and know what even hit them. But I think one of the pernicious sides of FMEV is that it's often invisible to the eye, right? You can look at your transaction, but even if you look at your transaction in Etherscan, you won't necessarily see that you've gotten sandwiched, for example, because the sandwich would be then in different transactions that come before and after your own transaction, right? And so it's many things. It's a lack of awareness, a lack of visibility, a lack of sophistication, and yeah, so it's really a multi-pronged problem that we are slowly chipping away at.
All right, so competition, privacy, redistributing MEV to users, those are kind of philosophies and ideologies, right? So I want to kind of map that across the MEV value chain as it exists today. And my question to you is, so if we kind of lay out, right, there's kind of users and wallets, then there's searchers, builders, relays, validators. And when you're designing how MEV should flow through that entire value chain, those principles that you laid out, I totally agree with. my question is, what do you do when the principles that you're trying to design a system around bump up against the natural economics that organize that system? And what I mean by that is there's every incentive for actors in that value chain to vertically integrate or create these little deals in between each other and consolidate so that it looks less and less like the design ideologies. How do you deal with that bumping up?
Yeah, basically you have to include that in your design. So you always have to assume, I think in distributed systems design, you always have to assume that people act in their own best self-interest, and nobody does something for someone else, right? Everybody just does what's best for them. And you need to understand what these strategies are, these self-motivated strategies, and then you need to design the system that it's robust and it gives you the guarantees that you want, even when people just do what's best for them. And so I think we can. So we could go into an example, right? So for example, why I would say, so some people say that there are different schools in MEV, which I actually don't agree with, and I'll tell you why in a second. So this is a straw man, but there's the school of democratizing access to MEV, which just says that we can't. It's very difficult to minimize MEV. So let's make sure that the access to the best block is available to all validators. So validators can stay simple and decentralized. And we isolate the centralization and complexity of block building into this new role, the block builder, right? And then we try to make this role very competitive, but we isolate it first. And so this has already done a lot in order to curtail the level of vertical integration that you were talking about, right? And then the other alleged school says we have to minimize MEV instead of democratizing it, right? Democratizing is the wrong path. And so I think these are not competitive at all. I think you should do both all the time, right? You have to minimize what you can, and then you have to democratize whatever is left. Because if you don't, then you will get centralization at the validator layer, which we don't want. But back to the original point. So there are many MEV designs that have been proposed in the past that are not incentive compatible. For example, if you just ask validators to run an alternative client that orders the transactions in a way that doesn't maximize revenue to that validator, but that has some kind of, that is somehow opinionated about what MEV can be extracted or can't, right? Then whoever validator will use that, yes, they will have less MEV in their block and they will arguably cause less harm to users, but using that client is not incentive compatible. And it just means that most validators will not do it. And those validators who do extract MEV, they will over time outperform and crowd out the validators who ignore the MEV, right? And so this shows that it's not even, so even if you're willing to sacrifice something in order to protect users from MEV as a validator, it's not in your own best self-interest, but it's not even in the best self-interest of the system itself, because all of the solutions must be coherent at the system level. There's no individual player here who can solve this except for the user. And so that's why we are so focused on educating the user to use solutions that expose less MEV to begin with.
Yeah. So let's talk about, because an enormous amount of discussion thus far in MEV has been kind of dedicated to the validator level, right? And trying to enshrine systems where we don't have centralization and that's kind of the proposer builder separation, right? Which is on the roadmap for Ethereum. But there's kind of this new force, which I think is going to be emerging in the MEV value chain, which is a little bit higher in the structure of the value chain, which is kind of the user and wallet layer. And so we had seen, previously kind of block space auctions happening at the validator level. And now there's talk about order flow auctions happening closer to the wallet and user layer. Can you talk a little bit about that force?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the idea behind order flow auctions is that users don't just send their transactions to the public mempool or even directly to a block builder, because by doing that, by sending it straight away, they give away the MEV value of their transactions. If we assume that you have a transaction to make, Mike, that has, let's say, $100 of MEV attached to it, for example, because your transaction takes an inefficient route through DeFi. It trades on, instead of trading on all exchanges equally, it only trades on one exchange. And so it creates an arbitrage opportunity. Then what the order flow auction does is it auctions off the right to execute your transaction or interact with it in some way that allows someone else to plug the MEV that is attached to that transaction. And if you combine that with the principle of competition, then what you get is that you have different searchers competing for the right to plug the MEV from your transaction. And you get the same effect that happens when searchers compete for the same MEV opportunity with the block builder. What you get is they start to bid up the value of the opportunity. They start to bid up the right to take your transaction. But instead of paying it to the block builder or the validator, they pay it to you as the user. And that allows you to reclaim the MEV value of your own transactions.
So you know what is a little bit exciting to me when I think about this, and we'll talk about the role regulation is going to play a role in these systems that we're talking about. We'll get to that later. But the analogy has widely been used when describing MEV, a payment for order flow, right? And that's to use the way this works in traditional TradFi kind of markets is brokerages sell their order flow to internalizers like Citadel Securities, right? And that's why Robinhood has been able to offer zero trading fees to its largely retail user base, which is kind of dumb order flow is the word that these people use. And if you actually take that to its extreme, right? Citadel Securities did something like some incredible number, like $18 billion or something like that in profit last year. So what's kind of cool, what you're talking about, MEV redistribution to the user, is the next logical step to that is actually to say, I'm going to compensate you and pay you actually to trade. So not only can you trade for nothing, but we're going to return some of the fees that we got to you, which is an exciting concept to me. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I would say that I think on a common sense basis, you can never get paid to trade. And so it's a very tricky idea because you are paying something, otherwise they wouldn't give you that service, right? It's just that you're paying in an invisible way. And I think so there's a lot of things I think payment for order flow has a very bad reputation. I think the concept itself is sound, but I think what I dislike the most about it is basically the intransparency of how much you pay, right? What's actually the cost of getting a particular trade executed, and I think that's where we can do a lot better in DeFi.
Yeah, something that's funny about payment for order flow for me, because you're absolutely right? But to me, payment for order flow is almost an example of fee preference. So when you have financial markets, right, people need to there's infrastructure that supports that, and the people that create the infrastructure need to extract fees in some way. So it used to be, brokerages would charge you. It was actually a very honest business model in a way, but people didn't like it because there's this very seen, noticeable fee up front, right? In the form of, it used to be much higher, but even with Fidelity, it used to be, $5 or something, and now it's $0. Instead, people have opted for these invisible fees that you're kind of alluding to. And what Citadel does is when they get your order flow from Robinhood, a bunch of people buying GameStop, they don't trade directly against you. That would be illegal. But they understand, and this is statistical arbitrage, which is happening in crypto, and I want to get your thoughts on, is they understand that when people are buying GameStop, AMC is about to move. So the GameStop people don't get run over, but in a sense, the AMC people, the people that are about to buy AMC are going to get it at a worse price. So is that front running? I don't know. That's a weird philosophical question. Right now, I think the regulatory apparatus in the US says it isn't, but it's an interesting question to pose.
It is a very interesting question. I wouldn't consider that. I mean, I'm not sure if I would consider that front running. I mean, in a sense, you are using the information of one user to impact another user. But I'm also, on the other hand, not sure if there is such a thing as the right to buy AMC at a stale price. This reminds me of the Flashbots debate, right, where all of the old trading firms were complaining that they were now no longer able kind of to buy like stale market maker quotes on exchanges because they were starting to update so fast and so on. Yeah, so I'm not sure. It's a very interesting topic for sure.
I agree. All right, I want to keep moving through some of the ideas that you and I want to explore. So one other big question that I have for you, and this is, I know that Flashbots is working on this in the form of Suave, but even that kind of MEV value chain that we laid out, there's actually kind of another dimension to it because Ethereum has adopted a modular scaling roadmap, right? So not only do we have the main chain of Ethereum, but we have layer twos, right, in form of Arbitrum or Optimism or Base. And then the idea is we might have, either app specific kind of layer threes that sit on top of those two. So each one of those systems, MEV is being generated. So one thing that I think we're pretty interested in exploring, and I'd love to get your thoughts on now, is how is MEV going to work in that world of modular chains built on top of one another?
Yeah. So I think the first thing first of all, I completely agree. So the rollup centric roadmap of Ethereum, and not even just that, I think it converges. And you had this great season on kind of the modular stack in Cosmos. I think that the world of Cosmos and the world of Ethereum, they are converging in the middle. I think, and I mean, this is not a new opinion, but I think the Ethereum community has been better at executing and distributing, and so I think my money would still be on the Ethereum ecosystem out competing the Cosmos ecosystem from here. But nonetheless, technologically speaking, they are converging, and I think it will be very hard to say in the future if a particular project will be an Ethereum project or a Cosmos project, just because of how the different layers can be mixed and matched, right? So what does it mean for MEV? So I think, intuitively speaking, the MEV accrues to the execution layer, with the caveat that actually the MEV accrues to, like, technically speaking, the MEV accrues to whoever gets to order the transactions. And so usually the execution layer has some control over the ordering. So they can decide to forgo that. They can opt into being what is called a layer one sequenced rollup or a based rollup, right? Or opt into any kind of shared sequencing system. And in that case, this alternate system that now sequences their transaction now accrues all of the MEV. There might, of course, because the execution layer has the ultimate right to decide who they want to give the right of sequencing, who they want to outsource that to. So they still have a lot of economic power over that and can hopefully negotiate some form of profit share. So that would be my first comment on that, MEV in the modular stack. Then how is it going to look? I think one interesting takeaway is all of these layer 2 sequencers right now are centralized. And all of these layer 2s have roadmaps for decentralizing their sequencer. But if you look at what the sequencer actually does, it's it's basically the accumulation of what the block proposer and the block builder does in Ethereum layer 1. So it's almost like you're turning back time, right? It's like we could go back into pre MEV days on Ethereum. And so I think that shows you that these when these layer 2 sequencers actually complete their decentralization roadmaps that they have today, their job on MEV is far from done. I think that they will all have to struggle with the same problems that Ethereum was struggling with, about basically there being very inefficient MEV extraction. The MEV introduces a very big skill differential into block building. And because because abstraction in the public mempool is very inefficient, you now have a strong incentive to vertically integrate between searchers and validators. And all of these things will be true on layer 2 as well. And so long story short, I think what we need on all of these layer 2s is a form of PBS, meaning proposer builder separation, meaning we need to abstract out the role of the block builder. And I think these are 2 points that I'd make about the modular stack. And let me know if you want to dig in any deeper into that.
Yeah, I have more questions. So some of this I know is the rules are kind of being written in real time, but I think it's a good heuristic kind of rule of thumb that the MEV will accrue to the execution layer. That makes intuitive sense to me. I follow that. Here's my question to you right now, and I'm going to ask this question within the context of a single sequencer world, where with the assumption that we're going to move to a decentralized sequencer set over time. But in the single sequencer world, right, let's use the optimism model for now. So you basically get to bid to run the sequencer for a specific period of time and order the transactions. And if the profit that you can extract ordering that transactions in that period of time exceeds what you have to pay, then you're in the money and everything's good. But the difference in between, having the ability to order transactions at the base validator level at Ethereum is once you order those transactions, the block that's the settlement consensus layer. But this layer is still one layer up. So you could order those transactions, but then how do they get sent down? How do you make sure that the way you've ordered the transactions will settle in that way so you can extract your profit?
Okay. So a sequencer today in a layer 2 does 4 things, basically. So they receive transactions from a user. They decide on some ordering of these transactions, and then they give the user some receipt of where they have been ordered. So that's what we typically know as a pre-confirmation. And then number 4, then they send the ordered batch of transactions onto the data availability layer. And that's what basically creates finality from the perspective of the layer 2. So from the perspective of the layer 1, these you basically still need a validity proof of this batch, that it leads to a valid state transition, or you need some fraud proof window to pass that basically proves the same thing, right? So this is about convincing the layer 1 bridge. So from the perspective of the layer 2, once the sequencer has posted the data availability batch, or the batch of transactions onto the data availability layer, the transaction is practically final.
My next question for you here, and this is the last on this topic, and then I want to move on to some other topics, is the amount of fees that validators can extract from MEV and then their other revenue sources. That's the security budget. They're securing the Ethereum network, right? So I see a couple of different competitive forces here that might impact the security budget of Ethereum. One, you have the emergence of order flow auctions on main chain. And then you also have these sequencers, right, which extract their own MEV. And those I see as, am I correct in seeing that that's kind of taking away from the revenue that validators can extract? And should that be a cause for concern for the security budget for Ethereum?
Yes. So I think in the broadest sense, if we look at a builder as, if you look kind of a sequencer and a builder as one and the same, then yes, any money that is extracted by any other participant in the supply chain that is not a validator, that lowers the security budget of Ethereum. But I would say that MEV should not really be counted towards the security budget. At least that is how the Ethereum core developers think about it. So I think they see MEV as kind of an add-on, but it's not something that they want to enshrine. It's more something it's definitely something they want to minimize over time. And so I think it was Justin Drake who a couple of years ago introduced this idea of the minimum viable security budget, or it may have been Vitalik, I'm not sure. But the idea is that the minimum necessary amount of security should always be paid from inflation. Nowadays, it could also be paid through the base fee. So right now, the base fee is basically set by the most recent degree of congestion in the network. So the network was very congested, and the base fee goes up. And if the network was not very congested, the base fee goes down. But you could change this base fee based on other factors as well. So, for example, if the recent security budget was too low, then you could increase the fee and so on, right? Right. It's just not guaranteed that this will lead to more demand to transact, and so it's tricky. But I don't think Ethereum will have the problem or the need to do that, because Ethereum has a lot of holders, and I think that Ethereum can pay its security budget through inflation. And yeah, that should be enough. It should not have to rely on MEV.
Yeah. And there is one topic that I know our first episode, we're going to be talking to Tarun Chitra and Justin Drake. And I know he wants to talk about MEV burn as well. So we'll pick his brain on that. Hey guys, quick break from the show here. I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine swapping 2 stablecoins on chain, paying $0 in gas, and instead getting a rebate of $2,000. This is something that's actually happened on chain. To understand how, I want to introduce and thank this season's sponsor, Rook. Zooming out for a second, the current state of affairs at MEV is billions of dollars so far have been extracted from users' pockets using MEV. Rook is coming in and saying enough is enough. Blockchain should drive value to their users and the applications they use. It is time to leave the hobbyist era behind us if we want to move forward and we want to get this right. That's why Rook has built a custom blockchain settlement network, and it's one that gives you full control over the entire transaction lifecycle. Today, you can connect to an open source Rook node. The Rook protocol will automatically match, bundle, and auction your orders and transactions in seconds with zero gas overhead. Also, any MEV that's discoverable along the way will be returned to you, the user. Created as a collaboration between the industry's top mechanism designers and MEV engineers, Rook was built from the ground up to be scalable, safe, and programmable. You can get your own mempool, choose searchers and builders, and link your mempool with others to discover even more MEV. You can define how the MEV is shared and delivered as well. And Rook can basically process anything from transactions to meta transactions and more. This is the way that blockchains basically should have been from day one. So if you're a user listening to this, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to your wallets, go to your favorite app, your node provider, and say, hey, I want you to be working with these guys, Rook. I want the MEV that I create to be redistributed back to me. If you're a developer and you want to stay ahead of the game, the best way to do that is to follow them on Twitter. They are at Rook. Or even better yet, slide into their DMs. They are lightning responsive. They'll get you set up today. And if you do slide into those DMs, as always, please tell them that I sent you. I want to move on to, I think many people are familiar at sort of a high level with the idea of what a searcher is and what a builder is. And you did actually a great episode on Common Core a number of years ago, I think called Interview with a Searcher. And we're going to be doing kind of a 2.0 version of that with a couple of searchers in this season as well. But I would love it if you could just give for people help formalize, what does the searcher landscape kind of look like today? And maybe if you could kind of touch on searchers that optimize for long tail MEV versus short tail MEV. And if we could also touch on this idea of statistical arbitrage, kind of sex to dex arbitrage as well, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I think that there's a couple of ways to slice that pie. One of them is to look at the different forms of MEV that exist. The biggest one by far is arbitrage. So arbitrage meaning there's some trade opportunity, and if somebody makes that trade, then the opportunity disappears. For example, an asset is underpriced relative to some other asset or the same asset on a different exchange. Then if you buy that asset and sell it at the same time, then it evens out in the middle, right? And so arbitrage, I believe, represents about 80% of the MEV. And I want to caveat that by saying that MEV in general is very, very hard to track. A lot of it is invisible. A lot of it is happening between Ethereum and a centralized exchange, or Ethereum and some other exchange. And a lot of it is not easily recognized as MEV, basically. And that said, so there's arbitrage. Arbitrage is the biggest ticket, no matter how you slice it. Then you have sandwich attacks, and that's when you that's when you basically buy an asset before someone else buys it, and then you sell it right after them. They buy it at the higher price, and you sell it back at the higher price, which makes you win something at the expense of the sandwiched person. And the last one. The last one is liquidation. So sometimes lending markets have to liquidate collateral of someone, and then they just auction that off or have some mechanism basically for selling that. And it's typically searchers who do liquidate that. And so this is one of the examples where applications actually rely on searchers in order to do an essential job for that application, which is to recapitalize their balance sheet. So of these, I think that so sandwiches have gone down over time a lot, actually. That's for a couple of reasons. I think for one, users became more sophisticated. There's better tooling. So more users understand how to use a DEX aggregator. More users understand how to use a private RPC endpoint like Flashbots Protect that allows you to send a transaction directly to a block builder without it ever touching the public mempool. But arguably the biggest is just the existence of Uniswap v3, which led to more concentrated liquidity around the current market price. And that basically made it possible to set tighter slippage limits and generally have less price impact in pools, and it made sandwiching just a lot less profitable. Arbitrage is an interesting one because a lot of arbitrage used to be atomic, and I think this is a theme that I wonder if the searchers we talk to will confirm this. But this has been on my MEV bingo card basically for a couple of years, which is basically that atomic transactions will disappear, except for when the markets are going really crazy. Why then? Because then basically statistical arbitrage players turn off their models because they are afraid of getting blown up. And so only the most riskless trades basically get executed. And that's when kind of time for atomic arbitrage to shine. But so the reason why statistical arbitrage, and that means statistical arbitrage means it's a form of trading where you take balance sheet risk. So you buy an asset and there's a small period of time, or there's some period of time, it may be very, very short, where you have to hold the asset before you can sell it. So that is more risky, of course, because the asset can go down while you hold it, right? And so it's not atomic, it's not riskless. And but the reason why this form of trading will dominate nonetheless is because if you don't have to do it atomically, if you can do it statistically, if you can internalize a trade, you can generally do the same trade cheaper. You can use less gas, you can bid a higher price, and you can ultimately win the right to execute that arbitrage with the block builder. And in any case, so any kind of trading like that will happen at the block builder level anyway. So it's already today, and this may be also interesting to mention, many of the top traders in DeFi are also block builders. So they don't even go the step of the searcher anymore and submit their trades as a searcher to different block builders. They may do that also because they want to maximize their inclusion guarantees. So they want to maximize the chance of being included on chain when they have a profitable trade. But they also want to be a block builder because that gives them much greater control over their trading strategy. Basically, they can make the trade at the very last microsecond before they have to submit a block to a relay. They don't have to send it seconds earlier to a block builder who still has to simulate it and validate it and whatever, right? They know the position of everybody else's transactions in the block. They can cancel their transactions, they can make new transactions, they can update them, they can shuffle them around. It basically gives them much greater control over how they execute their trading strategies. And so I think if I had to guess, then these are my three kind of observations about the current market structure. So arbitrage is king. Sandwiches will disappear over time as kind of we get more better privacy, etc., and better dexes. And then statistical arbitrage will completely crowd out atomic arbitrage and any form of atomic trading. And then block builders and big trading firms, I think this role will merge. And this is something that we're already seeing.
Yeah. Tons to dig into there. I agree with all of that. And one thing that I wanted to get at with you is this. I think that idea of the lag, right? This idea of warehousing risk, even for a very tiny number of seconds, is very key. Because before this season and started doing a bunch of research, you kind of heard a lot about this idea of cross-domain MEV. Sounds very exciting, right? But when you kind of dig in, that's not really existent today. And my understanding is part of the reason, outside of sex to dex arbitrage, my understanding of the reason is if you look at like the block time for Ethereum is 12 seconds. If you look at something like Polygon, the block time is 2 seconds. So even if you had an arbitrage opened up, right? Let's say you are 3 seconds into an Ethereum block and 1 second into a Polygon block, you could lock in the Polygon side of that arbitrage. But then you still have 9 seconds, right, on the Ethereum block. And who's to say whether or not the validator executes on that second leg of the arbitrage, and the spreads are wider on both of those chains than something like a SEX anyway. So it's just not economical today to execute those arbitrages. Although maybe Suave fixes this in some way. And you're going to school me halfway through the season about why that might ultimately become possible. But I think that's an important concept to highlight. And then the last thing that I wanted to get at, I think you're getting at another important point about latency and the importance of latency as well, because these large, sophisticated trading firms do not want to warehouse risk for more. They're not even operating on a second basis. They're operating on a microsecond basis than they need to. And you talked about Flashbots before a little bit, and we know in TradFi the role of latency is extremely important, and that's starting to rear its head again in crypto. So with that as kind of the context, could you dig into like how do you think about latency? What is the role that it plays both in the view of the mempool, but then also in the strategy of these large sophisticated builders?
Yeah, the role of latency, that's a very interesting one. So from the perspective of the searcher and the block builder, I'm going to treat them here as kind of the same bucket. So the more time you have, the more you can slow down time, basically, the more valuable the block that you can build. For example, if you can get more information about the world faster, so if you can read the chain and any other quote-unquote chain, so the external world, you can read all of these prices and price movements and whatnot, and everything that's going on. The faster you can feed that into your model, the more time you have to kind of compute and search. That's where the name searcher comes from. The more you can search for optimal or profitable trades that you can do against the real world, right? And then of course you want to maximize the efficiency of your algorithms itself. So the faster you can run them, the more you can parallelize and so on. The faster you can compute and search. And then you also have the lack of getting whatever trades you want to make to the block builder, or if you're a block builder, then to the relay, through the relay to the proposer, and so on. And you would like to do that as late as possible, because that maximizes your time and it minimizes the risk of something going wrong. And that also hints to this going wrong also hints to kind of the value of cancellations. So you may submit your transaction, but then the price moves rapidly and you say, oh, I don't actually want to make this trade anymore. And so you have to cancel it. And that happens all the time. And so that shows you why many trading firms actually opt to become block builders themselves, because then any cancellation is instant because they're doing the computation and the block building locally. They don't have to go through around half the world to some other block builder who has to, the cancellation has to travel and then they have to execute it, and then they have to send you back a receipt and whatnot, right? And so the more this can be compressed, of course, the better for you. And you can see why searchers and builders and proposers all have a very strong incentive to lower the latency between themselves as low as possible, because that just maximizes their collective payout. And that's very, very dangerous, basically, because if this trend is, or if this incentive is sort of allowed to run wild, then what you get is, at the limit, you get searchers who are co-located with block builders, and you get block builders who are co-located with validators, all in a very small geographical area. In the case of TradFi, even within the same data center, right? Inside New Jersey or whatever, right? Or Chicago. And this might be okay in TradFi, because TradFi is built on top of local jurisdiction, local law, and so on anyway. But the ambition of crypto is that it's a system that is global and that is neutral. And when you have systems that rely on low latency, where it's better to have a lower latency towards other actors than to have a higher latency, and so you can never completely avoid this, but where it just pays a lot to have a low latency to other actors, then you will always erode this geographical decentralization and this neutrality over time, because you basically disincentivize being somewhere in the world that's not close to everybody else. And this is something that I predict will become a bigger topic in the next year of talking about MEV. And as usual, Phil Dayan, so he's the one of the co-founders of Flashbots, who wrote the original Flashbots 2.0 paper that first talked about MEV. He recently put out a post about latency and geographic decentralization, where he laid out this argument in much greater detail. So I would recommend everybody to check that out, because it's really important. What this means basically is that in the systems that we build, we need to make sure that they are not sensitive to latency. Otherwise, we will just recreate TradFi. We will recreate the same latency games, and we will basically fail in building decentralized blockchain systems. Instead, we have to build systems that are more tolerant to higher latency, and to actors who have a higher latency, and don't punish these actors for being at a different part of the world. Because otherwise you will get what you wish for, and that would be not good for crypto.
I've got one question for you here before we move on to our next topic here, which is I generally agree. I agree with you on that front, but I think also, this kind of hits into it. There's fierce debate right across where you would call kind of like the MEV maximalization corner of crypto, and then the fair ordering corner of crypto. And there's no sort of Shangri-La, when it comes to this sort of thing. So if you remove latency as a vector of competition for how MEV is extracted, what is the other side of that coin if you had to steelman it.
Do you want me to steelman fair ordering, or do you want me to steelman the other side to fair ordering?
What I heard from that argument basically is like we can't allow latency to be the determining factor in how MEV gets extracted. So what is the, if you push down the latency competition vector, what is the other competition vector that rises up?
So what competition vector rises up when you minimize latency is price. And so because you turn basically a latency auction into a price auction, and you force the parties to compete on who pays the most in order to fill a certain opportunity. And price is more compatible with geographical decentralization than latency. And so that is one big reason. There are other reasons as well. So auctions are generally more fair and more welfare maximizing. And they also welfare maximizing, meaning so the party who wants the item the most are more likely to get it. And then they are also more efficient in the sense that they maximize revenue for the seller of block space. And so in a market where the validator or the sequencer can pick their own ordering, then they would always prefer to do an auction, because that actually maximizes the revenue that they can get. And this is maybe where we build a bridge to the modular stack again. So I can totally understand the appeal of fair ordering protocols. They just feel more fair. It's sort of very natural that as a human you think, well, my transaction should be ordered in the order that it was received, right? And it's only at the limit that it starts to break down. When searchers start to compete, and basically it leads to this geographical decentralization. But that's the same argument as why users love Robinhood. It's basically the good is very visible and the bad is very invisible to them. And it's a kind of systemic effect that doesn't affect them personally. It only affects the guarantees of the system as a whole. But that said, there are some nice properties that fair ordering protocols have that auctions don't have. And I would say the biggest one is it's much easier to make a fair ordering protocol private than to make an auction private. So if you have a list of encrypted transactions, then you can only reveal the timestamp when the transaction was received. And you can come to consensus on that in a decentralized network. And then you can order these transactions, and you can later decrypt them, and then you have your ordering. But it is a much harder problem to take the same list of encrypted transactions and compute the output of an efficient auction, where you say the transaction that pays the most goes at the top, but you also want to minimize any conflicts between them, right? Because in this type of system, a lot of transactions will basically conflict with each other, right? And so this is true in both cases. But at the limit, it is easier to make a fair ordering protocol private than it is to make an auction private. And so that's my personal steelman of fair ordering protocols.
I think it'll be interesting to see, because we've got the two maybe biggest brand kind of layer 2s on Ethereum have very different approaches to MEV between Optimism and Arbitrum. So it'll be fun to see how that kind of plays out in practice.
And Starknet, I don't think has commented at all yet, right, on what kind of ordering preference they would prefer, at least that I'm aware of.
No, me either. And I mean, this decision will be made, I think, in real time. There's going to be, we're recording this on the day I think ZK Sync has gone live, so congratulations. But Polygon is launching their ZK network as well. So I think this decision will be made in real time. We'll probably see the pros and cons play out, and it'll be very interesting. One other, so a lot of this season is going to be focused on MEV on Ethereum, but we also have a couple episodes dedicated. We've got a MEV on Solana episode and an MEV on Cosmos episode. Now, the Cosmos one's a little near and dear to my heart. The whole last season was pretty much focused on Cosmos, and we did an MEV episode. But, I'd be curious, as someone who's spent a lot of time like very close to the metal or kind of in the guts of Ethereum, consensus and how MEV dynamics are playing out on Ethereum. I'd be curious, what you're interested in or kind of hoping to get out of the Solana and Cosmos episodes.
Yeah, for Solana, I think Solana, if I'm not totally mistaken, I think in many ways it can be a case study for why you shouldn't build low latency blockchains. So it's I see it almost more as an anti-example in that sense. So I think we will talk about the centralizing effect of low latency and what this does to a validator set and what this does to vertical integration between block builders and validators. And it's maybe not a surprise, I think, that the block builders, if I'm not totally mistaken, at least one of two block builders on Solana is also operating a liquid staking protocol. Because just by running the actual validators and the builder in the same place, they just have a big advantage over others, right? Then I think we will talk about fee market design, which is, that's tangentially related to MEV, I guess, but it shows that if you don't have a robust mempool and fee market design, and then you get basically a lot of spam, a lot of failed transactions. I saw an example the other day that 50% or more of Solana transactions actually failed arbitrage transactions, which is so insane if you think about it.
58%. Yeah.
And then for Cosmos, I think Cosmos and MEV is super fun. I listened to all of the episodes that you did on MEV and Cosmos. I know most of the people. I'm an investor in Osmosis because I think they're doing something very interesting. I know the guys from Skip very well. I think their approach to on-chain block building and on-chain searching, I think that's something new that we haven't seen before. And then I think there's a Noma and Penumbra, two projects that are at least kind of intellectually quite close to Swath in the sense that they have this. So they both have privacy as a big part of their project, and they have this. They want to move users from making regular executable transactions to having kind of intent-based transaction framework. And this is something that we also think a lot about and that I'm personally very bullish on. And so I'm really looking forward to picking these guys' minds and diving into some of the unique MEV ideas they have over in Cosmos.
Me as well. Yeah. It's funny to hear Miles laid out in that season an articulation of the perfect MEV solution, with two of which are going to seem they apply perfectly to Ethereum, but one is different. And one is the three prongs of a perfect MEV solution from his perspective was: one, avoid centralization at the validator level, check for Ethereum, minimizes harmful forms of MEV like sandwiches, I think check for Ethereum. But then the third prong is, this is a little bit Osmosis specific, which is you have a way to return MEV to the protocol. So Osmosis has a proto-rev module, right, which is a pretty exciting experiment. I think there's a difference in Ethereum, which is returning of MEV to the user. So there's the cool thing about Cosmos that I love doing that season is, there are very different opinions there, and they kind of think about the world in a different way. And like Osmosis has a very opinionated approach to MEV, and because they're their own sovereign chain, they can do that, and it doesn't necessarily perfectly align with the rest of the Cosmos ecosystem, which is just cool. It's a diversity of ideas and opinions.
Yeah, and I think something that we should dig into when we talk to them is how much of their opinionated nature can they retain when they actually start outsourcing their security needs, right? Because the big drawback in Cosmos right now is all of these chains have their own validator sets, and so they have this idea of mesh security. They have this idea of the interchain security that you can outsource your sequencing to the Cosmos hub. And as that catches on, how can they keep their own ordering and mempool policies while also getting the security from another blockchain, I think, is there a compromise there? That would be very interesting for me to know.
I agree. So the last topic that I want to get your opinion on, and frankly, this is one that we might not have an answer to, but is the idea of regulation. So right now, kind of the big theme in crypto is regulation finally colliding with our sector in a big way, especially within the context of the United States, right? The SEC has taken a very sort of opinionated stance and approach, and it's only a matter of time, bless you, before that comes to MEV as well. And, it has struck me that sometimes we talk about MEV as this like, hey, we all as a community need to make a decision about the way that this should work. But the United States and our regulatory apparatus has its own opinion, right, about how value, should be transmitted in financial systems, and a very specific definition of what best execution means, for instance. And, to put my own opinion forth here, I think a situation where users are front run or sandwiched, but some amount of MEV is passed back to them would not fit that, their specific definition of best execution today. So let me just pose that to you. It's, first of all, do you agree with that statement? And second of all, how do you think regulation kind of bumps into MEV?
I think that's a great question. And we have to caveat this. I mean, it's all speculation, right?
Yes,
We're not talking
absolutely.
to any regulators. I think if you zoom out far enough, then US financial regulation and crypto, or at least the consumer protection part of it, is actually very, very aligned. Because what crypto at the end of the day is all about is creating more fair and equitable markets for users where there are fewer central parties who can exploit them in some shape or form. And you sometimes have to make compromises in the short to medium term. So our systems today, they fall short of that. And not just because the system is poorly designed, it's more so that the applications on top of it are poorly designed. And this in turn may be this may be a result of like lack of privacy, lack of throughput, etc. Right? But I think the silver lining is that, the execution that users can get on public blockchains is getting better and better every year. So if you just compare kind of the execution quality of users, I would love to see that charted on a graph, and I think it's going up, parabolically, and I think it'll continue to go up as we learn to build better exchanges and as we learn to make the base layer more MEV resistant, etc. Nonetheless, so I would also agree that yes, sort of the crypto does not currently fit into any frameworks of what best execution means in traditional finance. I think that's okay. I think that definitions can change. And I also think regulators are pragmatic and use a kind of, I think they apply their force where it's the most necessary, except if they get some kind of course, orders from above that are more political or of kind of national security interest. And the third point would be that what we need to build our systems in a way that they are just not subject to the regulation of a single party. Because if a single regulatory regime can make the rules in crypto, then crypto just as a concept has just failed. And that's why I'm so anti-latency minimization and so on as well, because this just creates the conditions for crypto to centralize in a single geographical regime. And this is something that we have to avoid. We need to make it so that crypto has power centers in the US, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in China, and so on. And I think that's when crypto reaches its maximum resilience. And no single regulator can come along and kind of enforce its own preferences or utility function on the system as a whole. Maybe they can say, well, as a US validator, here's what you can and can't do, right? But this will only have a small effect on the system as a whole, because the other validators might still do what they want, right? And so I think in order to build a system that is truly robust, then you just need participants from many jurisdictions, and you need a way for their own utility functions to kind of make it into this hot pot of utility functions that creates the total guarantees of the system.
And I think the fair caveat to say is some of the subject matter that we cover in this season is going to be discussing what's currently happening, but some of it is necessarily going to be speculating a little bit about how things are going to play out in the future. And so we'll do our best to caveat when that's the case. But I think we covered all the major topics that we're going to be getting into. I think this is going to be, especially if you're a nerd around MEV or how blockchain systems work, this is going to be a wildly fun season. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to digging into it. And we've got a great first episode lined up with Justin and Tarun. So we'll dig into it more then.
Yeah, sounds great. I look forward to that episode.
As well. All right, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.